welcome on in, everybody. I am going to be talking about all of the evidence of crime and punishment in ancient Egypt that we have surviving. And I'm going to say this in general, we don't have a lot. But what we do have is luckily very diverse. It covers a lot of different crimes, and it talks a lot about different types of punishments. And we do have some very good textual references that give us a lot of detail. But when you're talking about the grand scheme of things, we just don't have a lot of it. Sometimes we only have one instance of one type of crime or punishment. So first I'm going to give you a general overview of the sources that we have for these crimes. We're going to go over the types of crimes recorded. Sometimes there are punishments that are associated with those particular crimes, but we'll also be talking about the specific examples and the sources of those crimes. And then at the very end, we'll also be able to talk about additional punishments that are listed in other places that don't necessarily have a specific crime that it's kind of associated with. Also, sorry, I just have to check something. Okay. I just want to make sure TikTok Live can see what I'm seeing. And as I said earlier, this is not going to be an image-based lecture. This is going to be a text-based lecture, and that is just because we just don't have as many images. There are going to be some trigger warnings. I will be showing images of human remains on one slide. We're going to say this very nicely. I hope I'm pretty sure I will remember to say before that. Thank you, Snorri G, for the follow. There will also be discussion on murder, on killings, on injuring someone, as well as a small section about rape and adultery. So trigger warning for those. They are not graphic, and I will warn you again when we talk about those subjects. We don't have a lot of evidence for it, but it is going to be mentioned. So just so you guys are aware of that. Alrighty. So I want to talk about what we know. Oh my god. Of course, right as I get started, TikTok. Right as I get started. Okay. Okay, so I very briefly want to talk about what we know about the Egyptian judicial system, and we honestly don't know a lot. We know that the ultimate authority on the legal system was most likely the vizier, who held the position of supreme judge. And we know that underneath the vizier, there were multiple different types of court systems. So there's one called the Kenbet, which operated on both a regional and national level. And then we also know there was other courts called the Seru and the, let me read this correctly, Jat, who administered the laws and regulations. We know that these courts could deal with a range of legal matters, including civil disputes, criminal cases, and property disputes. We have some evidence of a court system in the Old and Middle Kingdoms, but they don't really seem to evolve until the New Kingdom, where there was a significant development in the justice system, and is one of the first instances that we seem to have what we can sort of call an established police force. This is maybe sometimes where you'll hear the word Magi, which has been used in a lot of different contexts now, kind of in popular culture. We know that it's talked about in Forewarned, as they use the word Magi to be essentially the ghosts that are protecting the tomb that your character is essentially trying to loot. In Assassin's Creed Origins, the Magi are they sort of are closer to the accurate in that they are sort of a native police force. The Mummy, correct me if I'm wrong, those are the guys with the ankh on their tattoos on their forehead that are protecting the mummy from being found, right? Okay, yes. I was just double checking that because you guys know I'm not as familiar with that movie as I could be. But that word gets floated around, and it is vaguely it is supposed to be this police force. In some cases, we believe that this police force may have not been native Egyptian, may have actually been mercenaries that were hired outside of Egypt, foreign mercenaries were hired to sort of be this police force. But it's not always clear. This does not appear to come about until, again, the New Kingdom. But we always have to remember, we have less textual information from the Old and Middle Kingdom than we do from the New Kingdom. So just because we don't have textual evidence from it does not mean it is possible, that it's not possible there is always the chance that it is possible, and that the text that told us of this is missing and will never be found. And this is something I literally was fighting with somebody in the TikTok comments today. I'm just like, just because there is no evidence that has been preserved doesn't mean there wasn't evidence previously. Like, it really sucks because the Old Kingdom just doesn't have a lot. Like, it just doesn't have a lot. Oh, Silver. Yeah, exactly. And people will just make that argument all the time, and I'm always just like, what, like, I'm sorry? Like, does that mean that, does that mean that people in the 1600s weren't born because, no birth certificates were recorded? Think about it, guys. Think about it. Think about what can be preserved and what cannot be preserved. And you have to give that wiggle room. You can't just, like, go off of that at the same time. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Thank you so much, Remember. I have to write that down and post it on this TikTok because I'm fighting with somebody about this. Yeah. Yes, good job, PigTunaNeil. Everyone's putting it in. Yeah, the fossil record's similar like that. It's just like, there are things that just won't be preserved. And I've joked about this before. It's just like, I don't think we have any textual evidence of, like, or an image of an ancient Egyptian going to the bathroom. We do have images of ancient Egyptians vomiting, but I don't think we have images of people going to the bathroom. Doesn't mean that they didn't go to the bathroom. Because people do this again with imagery for me as well. Like, this is the big argument about, like, why aren't the pyramids depicted anywhere? And I'm just like, because they didn't want to depict them anywhere. Because they're there. Like, you just look out your window and there they are. Like, why do you have to, this fictional person who's arguing with me feels like well, you have to depict it, but you don't. That's just how your mind works, and your modern mind, like, you think it's stupid that they wouldn't depict it, but they probably think it's weird that you would depict it. Like, we just can't put our modern mindset and modern perspective on ancient peoples because we just don't know. Exactly. And I'm honestly, that's so true, Silver. It's like, I don't have a picture of me going to the bathroom. Like, what do you mean? Yeah, and I think people just have a harder time. People don't think that they are biased. I think it's kind of like people, like, have this, like, this inherent maybe pride or something that they just don't think that they are biased when they make these biases, like, all the time. Like, I think it's just a weird modern thing, and it's just like, I don't know. It's something that is just odd that I've noticed, is that, like, people just don't think that they have a bias, and they're like, I'm like, and they don't understand that kind of perspective thing, really, until you really kind of try to help them understand. Okay, so there are a couple different words for crime and punishment. I only picked a few of them, but one of the main words that they are going to use is bata, or beta, sort of, which is wrong, like something like this is a wrong thing, and also means crime. There is also, what is it? So when you add something to the end of that word, so if you go, beta en mut, beta en mut, literally translates as crime, a great crime worthy of death. The en mut is worthy of death. And so that is what we would say is, like, a capital crime. Like, that crime is so important, like, that is a felony versus a misdemeanor. And you just kind of add to it. You better do better. I also found these words in our dictionary. So we have negit, which is the breach of law, which is also crime. There's also hebenet, which is crime. It also can mean accusation. And then we also have the most common word, because there are quite a few different words for this, to punish is hesef. And hesef means to exclude the perpetrator from society. And then there is also another word. I forgot to take a picture of this one, but there's a word called seba. And seba, although normally is used to mean teaching, like it means to teach, but it has apparently been used as a way of like, it can be used sort of in this criminal like context, in that it means that it's a measure to try to integrate and educate a criminal. So like it is just the word for to teach, but it also apparently is like a reforming almost, can take that context when you're putting it in particular sentences, which I thought was very, very interesting. And I thought it was interesting that they have kind of this nuance between the two different types, because I will say not a lot of my research told me about that side of kind of educating and teaching. So it's like, yeah, like rehabilitation. I haven't found a lot of evidence as that as a punishment, so I think it's very interesting that that is like a mentioned word. We're gonna have an ad in about a minute, so I'm gonna quickly go through this. So the main sources for all these crimes and punishments are texts. So we have royal texts that are like decrees, administrative texts like court proceedings. We also have private texts like biographies and letters. The vast majority of these come from the Ramesside period. So only the 18th and 20th dynasties of the New Kingdom. And obviously it makes a great example of what crime was like in those two time periods, but it also makes a horrible example of what it was like outside of those time periods. So it's really hard to, thanks Mark. It's really hard to kind of, I'm gonna snooze this one, just so I can finish this section, and we'll take a break in a second. It's obviously like we have a great source for the Ramesside period of what crime and punishment was like, but now we have nothing from any other time period almost. So I don't want to make a lot of these generalizations of how it was like in ancient Egypt over time, because we can't make those. We have so little information. I found some that come from maybe the Old Kingdom and maybe the Middle Kingdom, but the vast majority are coming from the New Kingdom, and in particular 2 dynasties, which is a very small period of time. So really, like, this lecture should be crime and punishment in the Ramesside period. Really, it truly should be. But I will try to mention any of the ones that are not from this time period. So there doesn't seem to have been a written law code or criminal law, or at least one has not been preserved, and there's really no reference to it that it was actually preserved. It appears that there was something in the Ptolemaic era, but it's unclear if that was passed down or if that possibly was a Greek like integration into society. We do have some religious texts like chapter 125 of the Book of the Dead. There are some curses, there are some literary texts that give us hints into crime and punishment, but most of the time, if it's especially if these literary and religious stuff, we can't really take it as face value because they are functioning very different than an actual administrative text or a court proceeding that is telling us what actually happened. And then when it comes to representations, they are pretty much non-existent. There are very only a few featuring punishments. Crimes themselves are pretty much like never featured. And we do have a small amount of physical evidence, and that essentially would be a mummy themselves having features on their body that indicate that a crime may have taken place. But again, we can't really do the full autopsies that you can do nowadays on this mummy. So again, it's impossible to tell like how it actually happened. And then I will say there doesn't really seem to be a distinction of crimes against the state or crimes against the state and the king versus crimes against other humans. We're going to be covering all of these. They're a little bit mixed up in order, but there I did not read that right. There is a distinction between crimes against the state and the king and crimes against other humans. Apologies, I read that completely wrong. There is some sort of distinction. It usually involves like the punishment. I hate to say this makes sense. It's like if you're going to go assassinate a world leader, it's going to be much different for you than if you just go kill another dude. It depends, but like sometimes those things get elevated. And especially when the pharaoh is seen as a god and like probably should not die. Like, it just doesn't make any sense for him to die. But yeah, okay. I'm not gonna switch to the next slide because we have the ad coming up. Any questions so far? I'll give you some hints of some of the crimes that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about robbery. We're going to talk about theft. We're going to talk about specific things to the king. So insulting the king, treason against the king. We are going to talk about murder. Again, we're going to talk about rape, but we are going to more talk about adultery, which I think is even more interesting that it is like a crime in ancient Egypt. What is the other ones? I think injuring somebody else and... oh, desertion. I think that's the last one. So those are some of the hints of some of the crimes that we're going to talk about. I'm going to drink this water because my throat became super dry. Oh, very good question, Snorri. I have found no evidence that they could. Well, we might hit on that, but I have not found evidence that any king was charged with a crime. But it does seem that there's a possibility when it comes to the treason, because of like the shifting of a king. So possibly. We'll talk about that in a little bit. That's a really good point. Yeah, I didn't know that Roman law differentiated. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so the usurper is what I'm kind of inkling that, like, it's a possibility, but yes, more than likely, no, you cannot charge. Because somebody has to accuse the king of something. And they'd just probably be killed, probably, if they go and accuse the king of something else. Okay, we're about to have an ad. Take a couple minutes. I'm gonna eat some corn nuts. And check my email. And we will be back shortly. Or check my TikTok, honestly. Let's rest at this time. Is the ad gonna start, though? This is the key question. There we go. Okay. We will get back into it after this ad. Emails. Okay. Oh. Sorry, I saw something in my email that was very interesting. By the 3-minute ads now. I understand why I did them. "54 seconds. I know, man. I'm thinking about maybe whenever I have a lecture disabling ads, but I feel like I'm gonna forget to re-enable them. I think that's probably what I'll do. Hi, friend at arms. You can't hear me because there's an ad. Thank you, Whirlpool. I appreciate it. You can't hear me. We'll go to the next slide so people can see that. Okay, we're back. Yay, hello, friend at arms. Welcome on in. We're talking about crime and punishment in ancient Egypt, and we just sort of got started, so. Okay, so the first crime we are going to talk about is robbery. We're going to talk about robbery and theft, which definitely has a difference that I may be too nuanced for myself, because it appears that both of them are punished in the same way. So in most cases, the word to rob was awa. Ooh, wait, how do I say that? Awa. No. A-I-E. There we go. So, Mark, I didn't really explain this in like my lecture, but we'll talk about it. This supposedly, and we're gonna say supposedly this is a bodyguard baboon who is capturing the man in front of him who is robbing whatever these are in this basket. I don't know if that's what the text actually says next to it, but whenever I've looked up baboons, they always used to say, oh, like they could hire baboons as like bodyguards, like, and I was like, so when I was looking up robbery, this is the only picture that I really like could find. I don't even know what tomb this is from, so this is a very weird sus image, but supposedly that is what's going on, is he's grabbing this guy. The interesting thing is you can see that the guy holding the monkey is wearing a kilt and the guy here is not, like he's naked. This would indicate a poor person who like quite literally can't afford a kilt, and like it kind of indicates that this person is like at a loss and like needs something and will loot for it essentially. So Whirlpool, we have some evidence of that, but not as much. One of the cutting off of hands thing is actually a war token. You cut off the right hand of your enemy. That is the right hand. So we have the word to rob, which was all-ai, I think that's how you say it. It's really hard. Or ETM, all. The problem is it's a U sound, and I can't do A-U-A. Au, I guess, probably. No. Au-ah. There we go. Au-ah. We do have a separate word for stealing, which would be iti or nehem. And we don't have a lot of direct cases of robbery, but we have a lot of allusions to it in texts. So in some cases of theft, as well as kind of their respective punishments. So in a decree from Ramses III that is found on the island of Elephantine, robbery and theft of cattle are punished by the same sanction. But unfortunately, due to a gap in the text, we don't know what the sanction actually said the punishment was. So we just know that theft of cattle are the same thing. Theft of private property, especially things in daily life, is frequently mentioned in the texts of Ramesside Thebes. The penalty consists of paying double or triple the value of the object stolen, and the sum has to be paid to the harmed person in addition to the stolen object being returned. And apparently then what can get escalated is that if you stole something from a temple, so temple property, which you also have to remember, temples are the vast majority of the owners of a lot of land, and like grain and like food usually goes through the temples. So the theft of what is considered temple property is mainly transmitted through royal decrees and is punished much harder. Not yet death. We're not at death yet. That's why I started with this one, because we're not at death yet. The punishment may be payment of 100 times the value of the stolen item, or a beating, or could possibly be the death penalty, depending on how bad it was. But hi, Mudman. So death is coming in, but like 100 times the worth of something is insane in ancient Egypt. And you also have to remember, there's no money in ancient Egypt. So this is not like I stole these scissors from a lady. I bought these for $5.99, which means I have to now pay you $500 and return the scissors. No, this means that you probably have to go, like, you have to get an equivalent value of that 100 times of physical items to return. Like, there's no money in this scenario. So in most cases, yes, death is going to be the worst penalty. And there is also certain types of death that will enable you to not have an afterlife, which is even worse. There is actually a weirdly better version that is death, but it still allows you to have your afterlife, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But death is usually the worst. Exile and banishment is very vaguely mentioned. A lot of the ones are like forced labor exile. Like you get exiled to Elephantine or Aswan and you get forced into labor. Which in some cases, some people might say that is worse. But the general of like exile outside of Egypt is very vague and doesn't have like a lot of like like evidence to kind of tell us what that actually is and stuff. Anything like if you stole like anything like highly valuable in a temple, so like potentially a golden statue or offerings to the god, like all of those things, like would have really, really high stakes. My favorite one to talk about is tomb robbery, and we actually do have a considerable amount of evidence for this, which is great. So this is like the one type of robbery that we have way more like specific evidence of, though again from a very, very small time period. And I'm currently arguing with somebody about this on TikTok, but I've talked about this before, that the vast majority of pharaonic tombs, so the tombs of the pharaohs, were looted within a couple months to a couple years of it being sealed. And that is mostly because the people who are doing the looting are the people who built the tomb, or knew somebody who built the tomb and went in to do it. Yes, very, very quick. No, Baby Bat, very good question. So we don't have any direct evidence of this to say no, because most of our evidence for like forced labor as a punishment comes from a way, way, way later. But no, Okay, so honestly, yes, there is the possibility that it might include pyramid building, but what I need you to understand is that slaves did not build the pyramids. Like that statement, slaves did not build the pyramids. The vast majority of people who were building the pyramids were conscripted workforce who were paid to come and help in like sessions of a couple months. But I think there is still a possibility that a small version of the workforce were either enslaved from other nations or native Egyptians who are criminals who did forced labor. That is definitely a possibility, but it's not the same thing as slavery. I'll mind you. I didn't find any evidence of like how long you would have to do forced labor, like if it was a forever thing, like you were enslaved, or if you only had to do it for a couple years. So I don't think we know that specifics, but I don't think this is the same thing as enslavement as we kind of know it in a modern sense. That's a very good question, Baby Bat. I didn't think about that. Is it still considered robbery when the king's ordering it? I mean, no, but the kings are not ordering the, like, yeah, I think that is probably more likely. Hi, Johan. We are actually giving a lecture right now. So we're talking about crime and punishment in ancient Egypt. I kind of have a little set schedule and such. I love the Amarna period. I can talk about the Amarna period for literally ever. I have been meaning to do more videos on it on TikTok. It's my favorite time period of all time. I wish I could go into more detail, but we're sticking with our theme today. So enjoy. Sit back and listen to the lecture. All right. Where was I? Okay. So when it comes to the vast majority of like every single like tomb and such is looted, like that includes the pyramids, that includes all of these huge tombs. For all of these pharaohs, there's like 300 or so pharaohs. Well, actually, there's definitely more than that. But like all of these pharaohs, we don't have a lot of evidence of the tombs at like physical evidence, like somebody writing it down, or we don't have a lot of physical evidence that they were looted, like when and why. We know that, for example, King Tutankhamun's tomb was looted twice before it was sealed again and then preserved. And we know this because there was things missing. Like there was boxes that were overturned. There were things that seemingly were packed back into places that it wasn't probably originally. And you could see the line on the wall where people had created large holes to climb into to get into the tomb. So that, in that sense, we have this really great evidence, but a lot of other ones we don't. And so it's hard to kind of reconstruct this entire concept, but we know that things went missing and that things were purposely destroyed or defaced. Like they would scrape all the gold off of like the face of a coffin or something. And so we know that these things happened, and we know that they were later then left open, and then later people... Sorry, I just got a text from my dad. Very funny. I'm sorry. We know that these tombs were left open and then consequently further looted. We know this because we have people reburying people in the pyramids. Like somebody in the late period's like, actually, I'm just gonna go put my grandma in this pyramid because I can't afford to build a real tomb. Like, we know this. So we can tell you that, oh, this tomb has been open since antiquity and was not looted by modern people or even people from the 1100s, the 1300s, That's a very good question, Snorri. For the most part, we have not really found... So, like, let's say I want to go raid the tomb of Thutmose III, and I go into his tomb, I take a golden goblet that has his name on it, and I decide that I'm going to be buried with it, too. That, I don't think, has ever really occurred. For the most part, a lot of these things would be taken out and melted down, and be reused in somehow. I don't really know if we have any specific, like, evidence that somebody's going to reuse it in their own tomb. I'm trying to think. I can't think of anything specific. Especially because, like, objects like scarabs, which always have, like, the names of pharaohs, like, those are not exclusive to a royal tomb. So, like, those you'll find in nobles' tombs and lower class or middle class tombs. But, like, that doesn't mean that they stole it from the tomb. That means that these are just objects that are always circulating throughout the site. Yes, there were objects made for... Well, so his sister was his wife. So yes, there were objects that have her name on it. There were objects that have his grandmother's name on it. There's objects that have his father's name on it. That doesn't necessarily mean that they were looted from somebody else's tomb because they're related. So it's like, Tut died very young. Yes, he died after his father, but his wife/sister was still alive. And so there are items in there that could be childhood heirlooms that, like, somebody gave him. And so, like, Tut's is an exception to a lot of these rules because it is actually preserved. Hi, we are sorry, I'm Gergs. We're doing a lecture right now about crime and punishment. If you're talking about the ones in the pyramids, we don't know everything about them. But yes, I believe the robots have kind of been stuck, and there's like stones. So there's a lot of different theories, but I do not know them off the top of my head. You'd have to remind me specifically, Snorri, which objects you're talking about. Like, yes, there are coffins that have been reused, but a lot of the other stuff is that he died so suddenly, so they had to reuse things that they had been prepping for other people. So I'm not sure which exact pieces you're talking about. Oh, the Ancient Origins website. Yeah, you'd have to figure out which one it is and show it to me. Sorry, Roxy. Someone on TikTok's asking about the robots that go in the tiny little chambers in the pyramids. Okay. So, where the fudge am I? Oh my god, so many other questions. What job do I think I'd have in ancient Egypt if I lived there? I have no idea. I don't think I'd be qualified. Maybe potter. Well, women really weren't really potters, but I probably wouldn't be fancy. Yeah, there is a theory that his death mask was originally made for Nefertiti, and his coffins don't fit exactly next to each other, so they were possibly like made for other people, but we don't have any like distinct evidence that it was made for Nefertiti. Like, it's just a theory, or a hypothesis if we're getting specific. But yeah, I'd like to be a potter. That would be cool, but I don't think I have done pottery, so at least I know I can do that, but women typically weren't potters. Maybe I'd make bread. Oh, I'd make bread. That's exactly what I'd be. I'd be a baker. Okay. So I know people ask me like why, when I tell them about like looting the tombs, people are like, well, wouldn't the people like be respectful to the pharaoh so that he can get his afterlife and stuff, and that if we go and loot the tomb, like we're disrespecting the pharaoh who is a god? And I've explained it in a couple different ways that like there is a high possibility that the lowest of classes in ancient Egypt like were not really as religious as like the actual pharaohs were, and thus like they might not have actually had this like huge like connection to the afterlife that the ancient Egyptians had, and we know this based on their robbing him, that like they either had no fear that they were desecrating somebody's afterlife, or they were desperate enough that they didn't care. Like, those are kind of the only options, like, that they're gonna do it anyway. Like, they need those things, or they believe they need those things. So it's a little bit hard to kind of wrap your head around, but like there is a distinct possibility that like the entire society was not as religious as it could have been. I don't know where I got this from. I got it thrifting. I got it from some lady on Facebook Marketplace, along with a huge collection of jewelry. So, and we have talked about like tombs, curses, and curses with big quotation marks, but like these warnings that would be in tombs about warning people to not affect their tomb. But you also have to remember, lowest of classes people probably couldn't read. Those curses were not really meant for people. They were sort of meant for the gods and stuff. So they didn't really have that fear, apparently. So one thing that I've found is that the only evidence that we have of tomb robbing, most of it only comes with looting royal tombs, although I have found some evidence that they knew that that other tombs, like tombs of nobles, were also being looted as well. Hi Kennedy, I'm doing really well. Gergs, I do have a video about traps. There are no traps. There are weird things that I call distractions and ways that they tried to stop looting, but they're not traps like they are in Indiana Jones. I do have a video about that somewhere on my TikTok. I have no idea where. It's probably in Asking Egyptologist somewhere, but I'm honestly not sure where. It might be kind of old. Yeah, your curses don't work on me because I can't read, for sure. So, we're going to talk about essentially 3 different papyri that talk about tomb robbings that actually are all related to each other and are almost about essentially the exact same tomb robbing case. So one of the best evidence we have is this papyrus, which is called the Abbot Papyrus. It dates to the 20th dynasty of Egypt during the New Kingdom. And it's currently held at the British Museum. We unfortunately don't know where the papyrus was found originally, but it was bought in 1857 in Egypt by Dr. Henry William Charles Abbott. Jam, pretty much every single pharaoh's tomb, except like one, was looted. Even Tutankhamun's was looted, even though almost all the objects were still there. There's an estimation that about 60% of his jewelry was looted during the 2 instances before it was finally sealed. The only, like, pretty much mint condition tomb that was not looted is 1/2 of the tombs of Tanis, and the Tanis treasures. 1/2 of the tomb was looted, but the rest of it, because it's multiple pharaohs being buried in one structure, so 1/2 of it was looted and also damaged from water, and then the other one is the other part was perfectly intact, although I think damaged with water. But the treasures of Tanis is the only pharaonic tomb that was completely unlooted, untouched. But pretty much every other pharaoh's was sometime. Yes, like Indy's Tanis. Absolutely like Indy's Tanis. Champollion loved loved figuring out the Rosetta Stone for sure, especially because he beat out the English for figuring it out. Oh no, Indiana Jones is not historically accurate. It's so biblical. Tanis is a real place. Like they're right about that. But no, Indiana Jones sadly is not historically accurate. So this papyrus gives insight into essentially this scandal between 2 mayors of Thebes, which is so interesting because I did not realize that there is a mayor of Western Thebes and a mayor of Eastern Thebes. And so we have these 2 men named Powero and Passer. So Powero is the mayor of the West Bank of Thebes. And just for a reminder, the West Bank of Thebes is where all of the tombs are. And then the East Bank of Thebes is where the temples are. It's where Karnak and Luxor is, and it's where the vast majority of people are going to be living. There's probably some people living on the West Bank, but not nearly as many they're going to be on the East Bank. The arc totally does melt your face. So the content of this papyrus is broken down into descriptions of events in a 4-day time period between the 18th to the 21st of the 3rd month of the inundation period during the 16th year of Ramses IX's reign. So at the very, very end of the 20th dynasty. On the first day, a group of men searched 10 royal tombs, 4 tombs of the chantress of the estate of the divine adulterers, which I have no idea what it is. I forgot to look it up. And then some of the tombs of the citizens of Thebes. So these would have been the nobles' tombs. They discovered that one of the tombs of the kings, 2 out of the 4 tombs of the chantresses, and all of the citizens' tombs had been disturbed. And they write this all down on this first day. The next day, there was another search of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings and the tombs in the Valley of, tombs in the Valley of the Queens and the tomb of Queen Isis. Those in charge of conducting this search actually brought with them a guy who was a coppersmith named Haru, who confessed that 2 years prior, he had stolen from the tomb of Isis and the tombs in the Valley of the Queens. So this man unfortunately could not point to the specific tombs that he apparently violated, and he was apparently brutally beaten to try to get the answers out. The rest of the day was spent searching for the tombs, and the results show that none of those tombs actually had been vandalized. And surprisingly, there was a celebration for that none of these tombs had been disturbed. The mayor of the East Bank saw this celebration as a direct aim at him and said that he was going to report to the pharaoh 5 charges against this group of people who went to go search these tombs. Thank you, friend at arms. That makes way more sense. I think it's an adorer, somebody who is adoring, like so she's a trantress, she's a singer, so she's a priestess of some sort. So the divine adoric. So it's interesting. I'm gonna look that up later. I forgot to look that up earlier. So on day 3, there is the text describes a conversation between the mayor of the West Bank and a guy named Kamwaset, who is the vizier of Egypt. Like, he is just underneath the pharaoh. And remember what I said, the vizier is the top man of the judicial system in Egypt. The conversation apparently ends essentially into an investigation into the 5 charges claimed by the mayor of the East Bank. So remember, the West Bank guy is like, hey, I need to talk to this vizier about this situation where these guys are putting charges on these guys who went and looked in the tombs. And then it turns out, actually, we're going to investigate why the guy on the East Bank is charging these people. And then on the final day of the Great Court of Thebes convenes, and after examining the charges made by the mayor of the East Bank and questioning the coppersmith, he is discredited. So this papyrus is very important in the grand scheme of like these political trials that are dealing with this tomb robberies, as it connects to other papyri from a similar time period that gives more details about how the actual robberies took place. And those are the ones we're going to look at next. So this papyrus is called Papyrus Leopold II. It's part of the original court records dealing with tomb robberies under, again, Ramses IX, the same exact pharaoh. So this piece contains the confessions of 8 men who had broken into the tomb of Sobek-Emsoft. And remember when I said that one royal tomb they had found broken into? This is the same exact tomb, Sobek-Emsoft II. And so the trial appears to take place also in the 16th year of Ramses IX's reign, but the robbery itself took place 3 years prior, which is very, very interesting. But the actual court case is the same exact time as what is going on in the Abbot Papyrus. So the main perpetrator was a man named Amenpu-Nefer, and his trial, we find out that the amount of gold that was found in the tomb came to around 32 pounds of gold. It also appears that the burial of the royal wife was also looted, and as the perpetrator claims, quote, "We also found the royal wife and collected all that we found on her. We took objects of gold, silver, bronze, and divided them among us," end quote. It does appear that the perpetrators were beaten when they were investigated as a way to aid in their memories. And this unfortunately does give like this air of like questioning, okay, did they actually loot their tombs or did they just confess under persuasion? But they did give a lot of details in this text, which points closely to their guilt. So they also mentioned that they, quote, stripped off the gold, which was found on the august mummy of this god, and its, that's not the word that it's supposed to be. And its amulets and ornaments which were at its throat, and the coverings wherein it rested. It said ambulance. I was like, that's not what that word is supposed to be. Yes, it does seem that beating to get confessions was extremely common. So Gerg's papyri is slightly stronger than like actual paper because it is sort of woven and such between like multiple layers of it. But you're right. Yes, we are extremely lucky. Yes. No, you are absolutely correct. The amount of papyrus that we have is substantial, but it's very, very small in case of what probably could have survived. One of the things I mentioned earlier is that all of this evidence of crime and punishment almost all comes from a 2-dynasty period in the New Kingdom, which obviously doesn't mean that there wasn't crime in the Old Kingdom or the Middle Kingdom. It's just because we have so much more papyri that are preserved from the New Kingdom. And you'll find out a lot of the other stuff that we have comes from Deir el Medina, which specifically has a crazy percentage for preserved texts. So preserved texts on papyri or preserved texts on ostraca, their percentage is crazy in comparison to just like normal places. Hi Mean Machine Rex, and hi Star, welcome on in. We're still on Tomb Robbery. It's only the second one we're talking about so far. Sorry, I need a drink of water. So it appears that one of the punishments for tomb robbery was impalement, which I will talk about a little bit more later, but it is actually the act of stabbing somebody with a spear, and then you tilt the whole thing upwards, and then the weight of your body just slowly brings you down. And that's done in a very public fashion. So there's also a third papyrus, which tells us more about this exact kind of time period of tomb robbing. So this is called Papyrus Meyer A, and it also talks about the vizier of the south and 3 high officials who are cross-examining suspects that have been charged with tomb robbery in Deir el-Bahri. So very close to the Valley of the Kings is Deir el-Bahri, which is Hatshepsut's mortuary temple, and there's lots of tombs around it as well. Hi T-Tem Cat, welcome on in. So the interrogation of both subjects and witnesses was preceded by beating, as kind of we know, specifically something called bastinado, which apparently is foot whipping. Vol, thank you so much for subscribing for 3 months. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. So yeah, foot whipping. Foot whipping specifically is a very interesting beating that that is apparently the way that they did it. So the confessions of six of these suspects was corroborated by the testimony of the chief of police in the Theban necropolis and other witnesses. Singly, one of those witnesses is the son of one of the thieves who had died in between the 3 years of the theft and the court case. And apparently this witness claims to have been a child at the time of the crime, which is crazy because even though he's a witness, he was also beaten when he was examined, which is crazy. And there apparently was also a female witness, and she was also beaten when giving her confession. So this is crazy. Unfortunately, you can see like there's little pieces of this that are not. Yes, it is the soles of the feet. Yes, remember words. It is actually the soles of the feet. I forgot to write that down. But yeah. So obviously this papyrus is in not great condition, and so we do not have a list of the punishment of these 6 men. And though it does record that there were 5 men who were discharged who were found innocent in this crime. So we don't have the kind of final end of like what happened with this tomb robbing, but we know that like there's also some people got to go free. So I'm going to tell you these 3 papyri are the huge exceptions to the rule, where all 3 of these seem to be talking about things that are happening at the exact same time. And these may have been the exact same tomb robberies. Like the Deir el-Bahri robberies might be the nobles' robberies that are mentioned in the Papyrus Abbot. So it is so rare to have something like this, and it's also so many different views of it, because one is obviously this conversation between these two mayors that a group of men went out and discovered that these tombs were looted, and then one is like the actual discussion and like asking a person, well, what did you do? And then this one is sort of talking about the witnesses and such. And so it gives us a lot of insight, but it's also from such a tiny time period. And the other thing is so exciting is that these are completely different. Like these are not just exact copies of these papyrus, because that does happen sometimes where things get exactly copied over, but these are very, very different in of themselves. All right, let's talk about desertion. I don't have a lot of info about this, but we do have some. So we pretty much only have one text that talks about like the direct info about the crime of desertion. It comes from an official called Nesher, who lived under King Apries in the 26th dynasty. So this is after the New Kingdom. And this is a picture of King Apries on the side. So in this biography of this official Nesher, he states that foreign mercenaries had deserted, and that his job as the official was to bring them back to the king. And then pretty much he brings these men back to the king, and the king immediately massacres them for that act of desertion. So it can be presumed that there's no actual judicial procedure that was followed in this case, because this was happening during wartime, so it was kind of a more tricky situation, because these mercenaries had been hired to fight and then they deserted. And the other thing, like, this is not an Egyptian soldier. This is a guy who's a foreigner, so it's a little bit harder to kind of, would they have done some sort of formal judicial procedure if it was an actual Egyptian, or would they not? And the only other time that this crime is even mentioned in a text is in biographies in the New Kingdom, which simply just have this statement that I have not deserted from the king. And it's just in this autobiography, I have not deserted from the king. So it's, the concept of desertion was definitely there, but there doesn't seem to, we don't have as much evidence of like what would happen if you deserted, minus this one text that king's just totally just going to take you out for sure. So there's, again, that's like, we don't got much on this one. So the next one is going to be, what happens if you insult the king? So we don't have as much direct evidence of cases of what is called lèse-majesté, so insulting the king, and its punishment. We do know from a court protocol in Deir el Medina dating to the Ramesside period that there is a worker who is accused of insulting a king, though we don't have evidence if a sentence was handed down. We do have, in the very early pyramid texts, we do have evidence that a deceased king affirms not to have slandered a living king. And so this phrase is later transmitted into the Book of the Dead, specifically in chapter 125, where everyone essentially has assured in their, as they are going to the afterlife, that they have not slandered the king. And so again, the concept of slandering the king is there, and they want to make sure that no matter what, I assure you I have not slandered the king. I am going into the afterlife with a clean head. I have not slandered the king. I have not deserted the king, if you were a soldier and stuff. So we also have, according to a text called The Instruction of a Man to His Son. Thank you, Snorri. A text called The Instruction of a Man to His Son. Someone who misuses the name of the king will have no tomb. So that's just kind of the statement. These texts are weirdly, they're not literary, they're not stories. They're just essentially like lists of advice. Like, they're just like these general, they're almost like proverbs in a weird way. Like, they're just these like big lists of like things. Just make sure you do these things and you'll be okay in life. And so in this case, it's someone who misuses the name of the king will get no tomb. It probably means either that like literally, like that you'll die and they will not bury you in a tomb. You will be buried in like a, it very much is a parenting book. It's really silly. It's either like, oh, you're not going to be buried in your own tomb, or you'll be buried in, you won't be able to go to the afterlife. That's kind of the main gist of it. I mean, who knows? Like, we don't have enough evidence to say whether or not it is, but I think there's definitely a possibility, that like, hey man, if you're at a tavern in the capital city and somebody else is there, it's possible that somebody could turn you in or something. There seems to be a lot of access to be able to accuse people. Like, you can, like, if you see something, you can say something, kind of like that. But yeah, it's just hard to know. It's just hard to know, like, if we don't have any evidence of that, but that doesn't mean there is none. We also find a text from King Thutmose I in his declaration at the appointment of his daughter Hatshepsut to be his heir. It says, and I quote, "As for all who will hear anything connected with the name of Her Majesty, may he come immediately to report to the king, as is done in the name of my Majesty." So this is like an actual decree that says, like, hey, if you say anything about my daughter, come and fucking tell me. Yeah, I mean, there's not the best evidence of taverns, but there had to have been. We know there was beer. There were definitely it seems like it probably was more done in the house. We just don't have any evidence of like a restaurant, I guess, if that makes sense. How much do we know of their law enforcement? Not much, Gergs. We know that closely to the New Kingdom, there was sort of a quote-unquote police force that they were called the Magi that kind of would protect and do this, but it's not very well known, like, kind of how it all worked, sort of. There definitely were places like that. I just don't know if we have any, like, super direct evidence that, like, we have breweries. We have tons of evidence of breweries, but you also have to remember that, like, people drank beer so that they drank beer every single day because they didn't want to drink the water, which was so gross. Their beer is not very alcoholic. So we only know really with, Snorri, I was thinking about that for a second. I don't know if you would, because I feel like it seems that if you are a witness, you're gonna get beaten. I feel like you might get rewarded. You might. But you apparently might also get beaten if you are giving a confession. Which is crazy. I think there's a possibility. I do think if it's like a crime that is against the king, I think there is a chance, but it does apparently seem that if you are a witness, you're gonna get beaten to make sure that you are confessing it, that you are being true. Why? If you're falsely accused of assaulting king. No, Tea Time Cat. I have not found any evidence of lawyers. Unfortunately. Whoa. Hi, welcome on in. But yeah, I haven't found really any evidence of, like, lawyers and stuff. Yeah, Gavin, it's really common in a lot of ancient cultures that they would drink beer and wine, but very watered down versions of it, because it was cleaner than the water. Like, they weren't cleaning water in the sense of it. So yeah, so wine in Egypt, wine is more fancy, and is probably a little bit more alcoholic than the beer. The beer is, like, barely alcoholic, like, even less so than actual beer is and such. Okay, the last thing I have about insulting the king, that Hatshepsut won already, that, as for all who hear anything connected with the name of Her Majesty, may he come immediately to report to the king, as is done in the name of my Majesty, which is interesting. Yeah, Star, wine is the festival of drunkenness for sure. So it definitely appears that this was a serious crime and everyone kind of knew about it. We just don't really have any preserved text that tells us, like, what happens if you did this crime, or how you would report this crime, and if, like, this happened really often, or anything like that. Beyond the grave, is there any evidence showed what they decided to do with the bodies of the people they killed? Yes, burned is one option, or buried, buried without a tomb, probably like, not mass grave and such, but like a buried without a tomb is, like, the worst thing you could get, because, like, But burning is the worst thing you can get, is because you cannot then go and live in the afterlife if you are burned, because you need your physical body. Burying is actually not horrible, but buried in a tomb means you go to the afterlife without anything you need. But burying is actually not that bad. 4 to 5%. That's actually pretty higher than I thought it would actually be. I'm so glad, Gavin. This is we always do one lecture. I give one lecture a month about ancient Egypt, and then I get guests to come in to give lectures as well. So this is our lecture for the month. All right, next one. This is the big one, guys. I hope you guys are prepared, because I love talking about this one so much. Okay, so treason. We're talking about treason, and we are pretty much only going to talk about one type of treason. There's obviously lots of different types of treason, but we are going to pretty much only talk about one because we have the best info about this one. So we do actually have, we don't have an actual ancient Egyptian word for treason. The best term is sort of what I mentioned earlier, which is the beta a'a en mut, which is the great crime worthy of death. This is like a capital crime. This is the big stuff. This is treason against the king and a treason against the state. We do also have phrases that are like the great abomination of the country and the abomination of all gods. So you're up there, really. And so in general, there are treasonous acts that are sort of mentioned in literary text, like in the instructions of Amenemhet, the instructions from Mary Carre, and the loyal, that's not what that's called. That might be what it's called. Loyalist instruction? That might be wrong. The punishments mentioned in these texts don't really mirror the judicial punishments because they are fictionalized. We don't know how accurate they are because they are sort of in this weird literary sense. But we do have some relatively good examples for treason recorded. I'm going to talk about some of the smaller ones first, and then we'll get to the big baby. And I assure you, it's going to be good. So one case of treason is directed against the Theban high priest, Osirkorn of the 23rd dynasty, so after the New Kingdom, who at the time is the Theban high priest, but he will become Pharaoh Osirkorn III in a little bit. And so I unfortunately couldn't find as much information, specific information, because it's coming from a translation of a text called the Chronicle of Prince Osirkorn, which is inscribed at the Bubastic portal at the Karnak Temple, but I cannot get access to the book. So I really wanted to find the actual text for this, but I cannot get access to it. So whoop-de-doo. If anyone has the Chronicle of Prince Osirkorn, give it to me. But essentially, this entire narrative contains his rise to power from high priest and prince to pharaoh. His father was a pharaoh, but I don't think he was the main guy. I don't think he was the heir to become pharaoh. So it appears that some sort of treasonous act was done against him, and that he himself goes out and captures the perpetrators on the spot and then burns the corpses. But because I don't have access to the text, I don't know what the treasonous act was. It may not have even been recorded, and we don't even see a sort of judicial trial taking place. This appears to be more of a rogue. But this time period is a little fishy, and there's a lot of things going around. There's lots of people fighting for power and stuff in this time period, so it sort of makes sense for the time period. Okay. The next and the most examples we have of treasons are harem conspiracies. Yes, I will copy it. This is the title of the translation of the book. I can find it I'm finding it on Google, but it's not a scanned copy, and I'm finding it in libraries, but I can't find it. I might honestly go and request it via interlibrary loan, but I can't find an online version, even though it's kind of an older book. So again, the main examples that we have of treasonous acts against the king are harem conspiracies, and they can sort of range, but they are mostly assassination plots, or trying to put somebody else on the throne, and they tend to come from the harem. So I know I've mentioned this before. The harem of ancient Egypt is not the same thing as a harem in an Islamic context. In an Islamic context, women are secluded, they're kept separate from men, and they are like the many, many wives and children of the leader of the like Ottoman Empire or something. In Egypt, a harem is just the word that we use, Egyptologists use, for the space where the royal women lived. But they were very, very much free to move around within the palace, within society. Yes, ancient Egyptian pharaohs did have multiple wives sometimes, so this did include like the great royal wife and all the great, like the princes and the princesses, but it did include some of the other secondary wives. It could also include like the sisters of the pharaoh or the mother of the pharaoh if she's still alive, kind of other female relatives. So, harem conspiracies mostly have to do with essentially women in the harem conspiring against the king. Most of the time, it's bringing one of the non-heirs, one of the other sons, to try to bring them to power. And then it sometimes involves like full assassination plots. Yeah, it's essentially just the women's quarters of the palace. But they're not locked in. They're not only cared by eunuchs. Like it's Egyptologists used that, took that word from the Ottoman Empire and just started to use it, but it does not have the same connotations as it does. I have a whole TikTok video about it that's like a little bit more detailed if anybody wants to know. And usually, if you go, I think on the Wikipedia for harem, there's usually a section about ancient Egypt that talks about the differences. And some people have written some articles about it too, which are very helpful. So, the first one we're going to talk about is in the biography of Weni. So Weni lives in the 6th dynasty. So this is a really, really early version of a crime that we have that is like pretty well documented. So the biography is here on the left. I actually just realized that it needs to be turned the other way because I'm looking at where the hieroglyphs are. I'm like, that's not how the hieroglyphs go, but it's okay. So Weni from the 6th dynasty appears to have recorded a harem conspiracy in his biography, and it would be again the earliest one mentioned, honestly one of the earliest crimes mentioned specifically. Thank you, Mr. Slothman, for 7 months. Welcome on in. We're talking about crime and punishment in ancient Egypt. We're on harem conspiracy treasons. Thank you, Mr. Slothman. I feel lovely tonight, except my throat is slowly dying. Oh, I'm not gonna be able to talk tomorrow at work. Okay. So this is in his biography. It's almost essentially it's an autobiography because it's written in first person, but he probably didn't actually write it. And it gives his life story. And so it dates to around 2250 BCE, was found in a limestone slab in his tomb in Abydos. And funny story, his tomb was apparently lost as a result of the jackass Auguste Marionette's description of the tomb from 1880 being super unclear. It literally says, quote, "on the high hill which gives the middle cemetery its name." What the fuck, Marionette? The tomb was relocated in 1999 by the Abydos Middle Cemetery Project, who found essentially this massive tomb that had inscriptions of Weni the Elder, governor of Upper Egypt. This is hieroglyphs, but the whole image is turned on the wrong side because I forgot. I didn't look at it close enough and just published it. But yes, it's in hieroglyphs. Oh, I have a link for you guys. It's a Jim. Very good question. He probably did like either like he is a higher official, so there's a possibility that he could read and write, but he would not be the person physically inscribing it. So there's a possibility that he could have written it out to somebody and then given it to the scribe to then give it to the sculptor to inscribe, or he would have done it probably orally, and that person wrote down the history and then gave it to the carver and such. Svetlana, I don't know what you mean by Ginger Pharaoh's doctrine. I don't know what that means, so I am not sure. You're fine, Sloth. Were women in Egypt harem educated? That's a very good question. Probably not, but there's an even possibility that pharaohs were not taught to be literate. There is something called the royal school, which was implied that royal children could grow up in the palace school. And there's also the possibility that foreign rulers' children would be taken to the school as well. And that could be close, essentially, to it could be essentially close to like the palace. It usually is in the palace, so maybe women in the harem, but it's less than likely because like in general the highest percentage of like predicted literacy in ancient Egypt is like 5%. So like the likelihood is very low. Oh, okay, Svetlana, no. No, that's not true. They actually just did a study. There's a new TikTok video that I just posted about an ancient Egyptian's DNA genome sequence. So, no, that's not true. Hello, welcome on in. So what I have here is a web archive link to the entire translation of this bio, if anybody wants to read it. And I'm just going to read out a part that is, I'm just going to read out a small portion that talks about the conspiracy. Yes, Crazy Unicorn Dash, I would love to see if you can send that to me. We do have an ad in about 51 seconds, so I might wait. Yeah, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait a split second. Sorry. What are you replying to? Oh, okay. Sorry, Mark. Yeah, in a sense, Mark, but like it also is potentially kidnapping the children. We have an ad in just a couple seconds on Twitch, but I'll answer some questions on TikTok. It'll be 3 minutes. Civil wars within dynasties. There are a couple that you could sort of consider civil wars, but not as many. More often than not, I guess the big one is I wouldn't consider the Hyksos. I wouldn't consider the Hyksos versus the Theban pharaohs a civil war because the Hyksos are technically foreigners that settled in Egypt when there was little power, so I wouldn't really consider that a civil war. I'm trying to think. I feel like there definitely is one, and I'm just blanking on the name, on like when that is. Welcome on in. I'm glad you're here. Amen, Messi and Seti II. Yeah. I'm not as familiar with the Ramesside period, but yeah, Star, who is educated on that, says Amen Messi and Seti II, which would be New Kingdom. There was apparently some fighting, and I think there's other ones that are earlier, like in the old Kingdom or the Middle Kingdom, but I'm blanking on the specific names. All right, there's an ad for 3 minutes on TikTok or on Twitch. You have 3 minutes TikTok to ask me any question that is completely unrelated to crime and punishment in ancient Egypt that I will try to answer. So any other random question that I can try to get. 10th versus the 11th. Yeah, that's probably true, Star. That would make sense to me. The New Kingdom is expansionist, but that's pretty much it. Like they did there are definitely instances in certain times where they did expand, like their territories, but yes, in general, they are not. The New Kingdom was really the exception, especially, the 19th and 20th dynasties. The Ramessides really tried to get a lot of shit, and that's why they did the Battle of Kadesh. That's all the way up, like, closer to Turkey, and the Levant and stuff, but, they didn't do a lot of that. Thank you, Svetlana, for the follow. But yeah, TikTok, you have 1 minute, 43 seconds to ask any question that has nothing to do with crime and punishment in ancient Egypt, if you have them. Snorri, I don't know. It's not my... I think it's external. I don't know. It's so hard. No Team Aliens. Absolutely not. Patricide, patricide, matricide. Ooh. Yeah, I'm gonna answer that mark in a second. Although I don't have a very good answer. 1 minute, 8 seconds. All right, I'm gonna chug this water. Oh my god, how is my mouth still so dry? Ah! It's just so dry. Oh my goodness! How did you find this? This looks like a weird website, but thank you. That is exactly what I wanted. We're downloading that. Yeah, Ricardo Caminos. Oh my goodness. How many outsider invasions caused huge culture changes? So there are quite a few. Like the Hyksos definitely changed a lot because they brought, or not them specifically, but they influenced Egypt to have chariots and horses, which were not in existence in Egypt before that time period. But then there was like, the Assyrians took over Egypt twice, and it very much did not really influence Egypt a lot. And even the Nubians took over Egypt once, and to be honest, Egypt influenced the Nubians more, like, it went the opposite way. So I was gonna say Greek and Romans, yes, did the most influence over Egypt, but at that point Egypt wasn't Egypt really anymore, sort of. So it's harder to kind of pinpoint that. I don't know, Snorri, if I'm an internal or external. I really need to like do some deep reading to like figure it out. Yeah, exactly. Like Nubians were so Egyptianized like by that point. It's hard to tell. Although there are quite a few Nubian gods that were adopted by the Egyptians much earlier than like the Nubian invasions and stuff. Thank you, Crazy Unicorn Dash. I'm definitely keeping this website. It looks super sketchy, but I think I trust you. I'm happy that you found it. Yeah, Nubians are super interesting in that way. Oh, I'm so glad, Vodka Water. We're talking about crime in Egypt and crime and punishment in ancient Egypt right now. Sorry, I'm making sure I got everything. So Mark asked, was infanticide, patricide, so killing your child, patricide, killing your dad, matricide, killing your mom, considered a major crime punished by death? I honestly have not found, well, we're going to talk about murder later, but I have not really found as much specific evidence of those three, like truly. We'll talk about like what all the stuff is, and yes, like the death penalty is considered like an option for murder, but I haven't found anything super specific about infanticide, matricide, or patricide. I don't think any of the examples that I have are specifically those. So, okay. So again, this is the biography of Weni from the 6th dynasty, and within this biography, he talks about a harem conspiracy. So I had the link. Here's the link again. It's on Web Archive, but it's a whole translation of his biography, and I'm going to read out the portion that has to do with the harem conspiracy. So it says, Weni says that he worked under the reign of King Pepi I, and he heard a case, because he literally is, where did I write that? He's a judge. Yeah. He's a judge. This entire biography lists all of his crazy, like, jobs and like titles that he has, and so he literally was a judge. He heard a case, quote, being alone with only the chief judge and vizier in every private matter, ... in the name of the king, of the royal harem, and of the 6 courts of justice, because the king loves me more than any official of his, more than any noble of his, more than any servant of his. When legal procedure was instituted in private in the harem against the queen, Imetes, his majesty, caused me to enter in order to hear the case alone. No chief judge and vizier at all, no prince at all was there, but only I alone, because I was excellent, because I was pleasant to the heart of his majesty, because his majesty loved me. I alone was the one who put it in writing, together with a single judge attached to Nekhen, which is a city. While my office was only that superior custodian of the domain of the pharaoh. Never before had one like me heard the secret of the royal harem, except that the king caused me to hear it, because I was more excellent to the heart of his majesty than any official of his, than any noble of his, than any servant of his. Now, we're just gonna lay this groundwork. The king's not in love with this guy. This is how the ancient Egyptians talk. Especially, remember, this is an autobiography. This is in his tomb to try to make sure that he gets to the afterlife. And so this guy is hamming it up like crazy. But yes, the king definitely trusted him to oversee this case that apparently was about the queen within the royal harem. Sorry, my stupid stool. Yeah, exactly. He's a bureaucrat. He's schmoozing. He's schmoozing the king in the afterlife so that everybody knows how amazing he is. Like, obviously, he says, I was excellent. Like, literally, like, think of the biggest guy. Oh, think of the dusty old Cheeto bragging about how amazing he is. Like, that's exactly what this is. So the interesting thing is that even though this tomb was found in Abydos, there was actually a second tomb for Weni the Elder found in Saqqara that contains a nearly identical copy of this biography, which is crazy, but also really interesting that he would have two big tombs, which shows that like how big this dude was, that he had two separate tombs very far away from each other. Abydos and Saqqara are like freaking far away from each other. So the unfortunate thing is that this biography, because it's about him, it's not about the actual case. It's not a court proceeding. We don't know anything else beyond this. We don't know the charge that was against the king, the queen. We don't know the outcome of the procedure. We don't know what this treasonous act was, but we know that it was something very important. When they say queen in this case, they do typically mean the great royal wife, which is a big deal. This is like the top queen, not one of his secondary wives. Because they say queen, they usually mean great royal wife. So this requires some sort of delicacy, and when he was in charge of it all, and like definitely is like schmoozing that like he was the trusted person to do this, because it is a very delicate situation for your great royal wife to do something treasonous against you as the king. All right, who's ready for the big boy? Okay. This is the Harem Conspiracy. If you ever hear it, just say the Harem Conspiracy. This is the one they're talking about. I had to tease you with a smaller one just because I thought that one was interesting. And it's so old in comparison. But like, this is the big boy. We're going to talk about this for like probably 10 to 15 minutes. So this is the most famous case of treason. It's probably also the most famous crime known in ancient Egypt because of this massive papyrus that we have preserved. So it is mentioned on the Turin Judicial Papyrus. It is known as the Harem Conspiracy Papyrus, and this is the Harem Conspiracy, like the big boy. So this involves the plot and the assassination of Pharaoh Ramses III, which did succeed in some ways. It succeeded in that Ramses III died. It did not succeed the actual plot to take him off the throne. So this papyrus was discovered sometime before 1824. It's now in the Turin Egyptian Museum in Italy. And again, with all of these papyri, we have no idea where these were originally found. We don't know what the general context for making this papyrus even really was. Like, all of these things were essentially looted from some place, put onto the antiquities market in the 1800s, and sold. So the story goes that a minor queen, so not the great royal wife of Ramses III, but a minor queen named Ta, not Ta who is Tutankhamun's grandma, married to Amenhotep III, a different Ta, just the same name. She wanted to substitute her own son for Ramses III's designated heir, the future Ramses IV. Her son was named in the text Pentawere. though it is more than likely that this is not his real name. This is some sort of pseudonym that is given to him, because names are extremely important in ancient Egypt. It is considered part of your soul, and if your name lives on, you can live on. So this may be a way of literally killing him in the afterlife again, by not actually mentioning his real name. The queen enlisted the help of quite a few people within the harem. So there is a guy named Pebek Kamen, who is a pantry chief. There is Mate Surya, who is a butler. There is Panhe Boni, cattle overseer. Panuk, the overseer of the harem. And Pendua, the clerk of the harem. Again, almost all the P's. There's also a chance that these are not real names of these men. Yeah, exactly. Exactly, Fred at Arms. There are 11 Ramesses. It could be any one of those. So this group was responsible for essentially attempting to raise up a rebellion against the king and to, quote, stir up the people, incite enmity in order to make rebellion against their lord, end quote. Essentially, at the beautiful Festival of the Valley, the plotters were able to assassinate Ramses III, but they failed to, the coup d'etat portion of this, and they failed to put Pentawere on the throne. Which, I hate to say it, makes sense, because they didn't try to go kill Ramses IV. Which I think is hysterical. That, like, they didn't go and try to kill the current heir. Which, to me, would make way more sense in a lot of ways. So, the key thing with this papyrus, though, it is not a detailed record of court proceedings, but it's rather a list of the defendants, with some being listed by these pseudonyms, the crimes they were accused of, and their sentences. There are some things that are, like, that tell you about, like, the actual event of the assassination and, like, the actual court trial, but the vast majority of this is just sort of a list. And there is a possibility that this is a, like, essentially abridged version of, like, the court proceedings after it has occurred and happened. And there's a possibility that these actually were hung up in a temple for others to see. And that might be, like, the possibility as to why this doesn't really have everything. It just has, here are all the bad people, and here's what we did to them, kind of thing. As sort of a warning to people, which is also silly because nobody can read this. So, most people couldn't read this. So, for a short time, scholars actually thought that Ramses III did survive the attack, but then died sometime later. And that's because the papyrus is actually written in Ramses III's perspective in some portions, and implies that he, like, was alive for the court proceedings. But we now understand that it's more likely that Ramses IV is overseeing it in his father's name. And so, like, it's not that Ramses III died. And we mainly know this because of his mummy. I forgot to give you the trigger warning for an image of a mummy. I apologize. We know this mainly because of the mummy of Ramses III, which is here on the left. When the mummy of Ramses III was discovered, there are quite a lot of bandages all around his neck, and they were wrapped very, very tightly. This is not the mummy who got his own passport, and I hate to tell you, Crazy Unicorn Dash, but there is no mummy that got a passport, because that is a... Well, there is a mummy who got a passport, but the actual picture of that passport is not real. I actually did a video on that a while back, that the picture of the passport turns out to be like somebody on Twitter created it. He did get a passport apparently, but we don't have an actual picture of it. It didn't look like that. And that's Ramses II, who is that this guy's dad? Maybe? Ramses II, no. I don't remember. Ramses II had so many kids that so many people died, and so many of his kids died before he did. No, these guys aren't related. Thank you, Star. I was like, I don't think these guys are related, even though they're the second and the third. Yeah, because Seti the second is Ramses the second's descendant. So yeah, some guy named Ramses. So when this mummy was discovered, they have all these bandages that are tightly around his neck. And then when you see the CT scan that they took of the mummy and x-rays, they can see that essentially his throat was slit so deep that it pretty much touched his vertebra. And it most likely, essentially, he would have bled out pretty much instantly. And if it had gone a little bit further, it probably would have like severed his spinal cord and would have been dead even quicker. I was gonna say Ramses II had so many kids. Setnacht is Ramses III's dad. Yeah. Could the fourth son of Ramses II be the same? Kamwaset. Oh, I think. Wait. So I don't think so, because if I'm remembering correctly, that is from the time of Ramses IX, which is really later. But I can't honestly remember. I don't think so, because I think if I remember correctly, that one is so much later. It's Ramses IX rather than Ramses II. But yes, Kamwaset is a pretty popular, is one of the sons of Ramses II. And it's not the worst. It's not the most unpopular name. So I think it's just a different. When I said Kamwaset earlier, I was like, actually, is this that other guy? And it's not. I don't think it's that prince. I'm actually now thinking, I feel like Ramses III had a son named Kamwaset, and he died young, and he has a tomb in the Valley of the Queens. Is that Kamwaset? I think it is Kamwaset. I think that's a very popular name. So, Ramses III probably died pretty instantly, and we now know it from the mummy. And I'll talk about the mummy on the right in just a second, because they are not the same. So, the rest of this papyrus tells us that the court consisted of 12 different judges, and over the course of 3 trials, those who participated in the conspiracy and those who aided them were found guilty and punished accordingly. Again, we don't really get the specifics. We don't actually know which one specifically assassinated the king and how how their judgment. It all is just kind of put into the general plot of the assassination. But you can tell by the different punishments that certain people were more heavily involved than others. So in total, 28 people were executed, while 10 were allowed to take their own lives. Now, the method of execution is not mentioned in the actual text, but it, again, could be the burning. It could be the, impalement. Would have been done publicly in some way as well. So, I know that the phrase allowing someone to take their own life sounds odd, but this is possibly a way that somebody could... This is a less worse thing than being executed, because ancient Egyptians all cared about the afterlife and wanted to get to the afterlife. If you are allowed to take your own life, there is the possibility that your body will still be preserved to be mummified, and that you could possibly keep going in the afterlife. And it's all possibilities, because I doubt you would get to the weighing of the heart and past that, but at least you get the chance. You're not in this inevitable area where your body is burned and you never have that chance. And so it's weirdly a grace. Almost. So one of the people that was allowed to take his life was the prince, Pentawere, who was the person they were trying to put on the throne. And it's super unclear if this prince actually did anything directly in this conspiracy, or if it was all sort of his mom that kind of volunteered him to sort of do this. But because he is listed in this with this punishment, you can assume he did something. So, the mummy that we have on the right, one of the is known as Unknown Man E. I believe it's E. So we don't know who it is. We don't have 100% confirmation. One of the theories is that this is Pentawere, or essentially a son of Ramses III that we don't know the formal name of. Mostly it's because he has a very hasty mummification. It's not a very good mummification. We also know that he is buried with the skin of a goat, which is ritually impure and would not have been something that any Egyptian would be buried with. And we also know that he's found in a tomb cache where all the mummies are moved to like the same exact area. He is moved with a lot of these huge elite pharaohs and royalty. So it would be odd if he is just a random mummy of someone else. But there are other possibilities. I don't know them off the top of my head right now, but like there are other possibilities of who this person could be. But one of the suspected versions is he is Pentaware. So the fourth and fifth trials concerned the punishment of some members of the court. And these are kind of the people who didn't do as much, so their punishments are not as crazy, but they are still pretty bad. One of these perpetrators had, out of these perpetrators, 2 had their noses and ears cut off, and another was only verbally reprimanded for essentially converting with the accused woman. So obviously he was found guilty of something, but he did not do a lot, so he was verbally reprimanded. Which is crazy that the range of punishments for this. The one thing that is not mentioned in this text, if there was any sort of punishment for the queen or any other women in the harem that most likely were involved. They are not mentioned pretty much at all in the text. So we can assume that they probably were punished in some way. It's odd that they're not included, but it might just because they are women. And so if this text is meant to be put up on a wall and scare people, maybe they didn't want the punishments of the women listed there, but we really don't know. So there's so many options. Like, I can presume that probably the queen at the least was executed. There's a possibility of exile, but I don't see it as likely. But it is odd that they are not mentioned pretty much anywhere in the actual text here. Thank you, Crazy Unicorn Dash. So there are a few other instances of assassinations. Don't look at how I spelled assassinations on there. Don't look at it. Jesus Christ. That is that bad that I have to change it right now. Oh my god. Okay. Don't look at it. So even though don't ask me. I was doing this morning at work. That is so embarrassing though. Okay. Thank you so much, Team Magic 95 for the follow. Welcome on in. So, I hate you. So there is some evidence of other assassinations that happened with actual pharaohs, but unfortunately we just don't have as much concrete, physical, evidence of papyri. So one of them is the guy on the left, which is Pharaoh Teti of the 6th dynasty. He may have been assassinated. His ascension to the throne was a little odd because he is not the son of his predecessor, Pharaoh Unas. But unfortunately, the only real evidence that we have that he may have been assassinated comes from the Ptolemaic historian Manetho, so literally over 1,000 years later, in which he has on his king's list that Otheos, which is Teti's Greek name, ruled for 30 years and was assassinated by his bodyguards. That's literally it. Manetho is weirdly a little bit more trustworthy than Herodotus, because he probably had access to some sort of document in a library of some sort, but it's still not great, and it gives us nothing. It just says assassinated by his bodyguards, so we don't know. And then the pharaoh on the right is Amenemhet the First. He was also assassinated apparently in his 30th year of his reign. It's only mentioned in 2 literary stories, which again, fictionalized, so how trustworthy can it really be? So it's in the story of Senue and the instructions of Amenemhat. So it appears that members of a palace guard who were specifically associated with the harem assassinated the pharaoh. In the instructions of Amenemhat, the deceased king actually speaks from beyond the grave to his son about the assassination, which is hysterical. He also warns his son about future conspiracies and not to trust anyone, pretty much. So because these are literary pieces, it's really unclear if it's exactly how kind of this occurred, but it does appear, because these texts are not super late, like they are relatively soonish after like he actually ruled, that this could have somewhat occurred. And then we also don't have any like evidence of like if anyone was tried or if there were any punishments. Like we have nothing pretty much about that. Okay, trigger warning, we are going to talk briefly about rape, but most of this is going to be about adultery. And feel free, take a walk if you don't want to listen, you don't want to hear anything. Nothing is going to be graphic, but it is just going to be kind of mentioning it. Tips on memorizing history. I would love to give you tips, except I can't memorize anything. Just read a lot. Like, just read a lot and watch videos, watch from reputable people. Like, it's not, you're not going to be able to like, if you can memorize it, you can, but like, I have a cheat sheet that gives me the years because I don't memorize those things. But like, you just have to read. You just have to read and find good sources and find the way that you can really learn. Like, if you prefer videos or if you prefer reading a more fictionalized textbook or prefer reading like a really dense one and such. Oh yeah, good, Joseph. Yeah. I gotta update that one. There's probably some more books that I want to add to it. But yeah. Crazy Unicorn. Y'all are awesome. Y'all are awful to me. Okay. I know. I was gonna say. Okay, so let's talk about adultery and rape and how those were the crime of them and how they were punished afterwards. So, the strange thing is that there isn't really any sort of distinguishing factor between these two crimes. In earlier times, we have the word nek, which means intercourse, but in the New Kingdom, it does take a new meaning that means to like commit adultery, but there does not actually seem to be a specific word for rape. In cases where the initiative to commit adultery was taken by the man, the punishment is not always known. So in Papyrus Deir el Medina 27, there is a man who is standing trial who had to swear an oath that essentially he will have his nose and ears cut off and that he will be sent in exile in Nubia if he meets with this woman again. And if he makes any more contact, he has to swear that he will be sent to Elephantine for forced labor or has to work in nearby quarries. And then there's essentially this case reveals the problems about drawing conclusions from oaths and actual punishments. Like essentially they would make you in the court case make an oath that you are not, that if you do this again, this is what will happen. Which, yes, could be the punishments, but doesn't always mean that they were fully carried out, obviously. So there's less evidence of what happens if the initiative of adultery was carried out by a woman. But it appears that the adulterer would, the adultery would lead to divorce or a lowering of reputation. And in the possibility that the women might lose any sort of items that she brought with her to the marriage. Like they say a bride price, but bride price is like, it's not the biggest thing that we know. The biggest thing is that like we don't know a lot about marriage in ancient Egypt and how that was established. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second, because this case that I found is crazy. So we have an example coming from the Salt Papyrus 124, which gives this huge range of accusations against a man named Peneb. So Peneb was a foreman of works in the royal tomb in the Valley of the Kings at the end of the 19th dynasty. He's living in Deir el Medina, which is this workman's village that is meant for the workmen who are making the tombs in the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens. So he's a foreman. He's a higher rank than most of the normal workmen. He is accused of theft, bribery, violence, and disregard for his superiors. Bribery is the one crime that I forgot to include in this, but obviously there does seem to be a lot of the bribery has to do with like officials bribing each other and stuff, from what I have found. So he also is accused of adultery, and it includes this passage, and I quote, "Memorandum about this. His son fled before him to the palace of the place of the gatekeepers, and swore an oath saying, quote, I will not bear with him, quote, and he said, quote, Peneb copulated with the female citizen Tui, she being the wife of the workman Kenna. He copulated with Hul, she being with Penduau. He copulated with another female citizen named Hul, she being with Hesi Sun Nebef, so said the son. And when he had copulated with Hul, he also copulated with Webekhet, his daughter, or her daughter. So he copulated with a mother and a daughter. And Apathy, his son, copulated with Webekhet as well. It's unclear if his son is the son who is reporting all of this or a separate son, but we're just going to be very honest here. If they are the same person, and this guy found out that the woman he's been copulating with also copulated with his dad, and also copulated, and her mom also copulated with his dad, maybe I would report him. Like, this is something that I sort of can see, like, he's mad that his father has copulated with a woman that he was copulating with, so he's now gonna go and report him. But we don't know. We don't know, because the son is unnamed. Like, the son that is reporting this is unnamed. So it's either two different sons or it's one son together, and we're unclear via the text. So, the accusations were also made by a workman named Amennacht, who was the son of a previous foreman named Nebnefer. He believes that Peneb should have not been appointed foreman, and that he would be better at his post. So you can see the drama is just unfolding. The drama is just unfolding because now it's like, I'm sorry, that man has a full agenda of he is upset that Peneb got the foreman position, so he's also going to accuse him of all of this stuff? I sense a fishiness in the air. So, the difficult thing is that we don't have really an answer if Peneb actually got in trouble. There's the possibility that he could have been dismissed from his job, but it doesn't appear that he would have gotten like any like larger punishment, except maybe like divorce. Like, there's not really a huge punishment that appears. But what is so interesting about this text is that there is another text that also mentions Peneb. And it's also about adultery, but it's not about him being the adulterer. So, in another text dating to the late reign of Ramses III, the guy who was actually assassinated, Peneb's son, so again, this could be he only has 2 sons, this could be he has 3 sons. This guy's name is Penauket. His son Penauket makes a series of accusations against a group of workmen led by a man named Userhet. He first accuses them of removing a stone from a royal tomb or a tomb chapel. He actually references in this text to the reaction of a vizier when his father was accused of committing the same exact offense. So that apparently was not mentioned in this other text, but apparently he was also accused of removing stones from a royal tomb. And he's talking about how he went to the actual vizier, and he sort of references is that, like, when my father went to the vizier, this was his reaction. He then also accuses this man of stealing an ox belonging to the mortuary temple of Ramses III, and then also he, quote, copulated with 3 married women, the female citizen Menat, she being with Kenna, the female citizen Ta'uenez, she being with Nakht Amun, and the female citizen Taweret Hetpet, she being with Pentaweret. So Penoket's accusations were made to a local foreman and a scribe, but he also threatened to take them to a higher authority, which would be like the vizier. So there's the possibility that his aim may have been to discredit essentially the administration that had succeeded his father at Deir el Medina. And what is so interesting is that these are connected, and it might even be like true drama in that, like, he might be bringing these accusations because his father lost his job or was exiled, or something happened to his father who got a similar crime accused of him. Yeah, and it's crazy that it's crazy that this guy's just going around sleeping with all these married women. Another instance that I thought was really interesting was a case about a married woman sleeping with another man. So there is this text that has a complete, all of these people are unnamed, so it's going to be a little difficult, or there's one name, but most of these people are unnamed, so it's going to be a little difficult to describe this. But the complainant, he is married to a woman, and when they got married, they continued to sleep at their parents' houses. So each of them were at 2 different houses sleeping with their parents. And essentially, he found that his wife was sleeping with another crewman named May Sakmet, who was the son of Mena, and he found his wife sleeping with this man. This complainant goes to the magistrates, and for some unknown reason, he himself is beaten. Like, he is actually beaten. Now, based on all the other stuff that we learned, he could have been beaten because he's being a witness, and apparently all witnesses are beaten, but it appears to be more like he is beaten for bringing this accusation to onto his wife and this other man. Essentially, another foreman protests that, hey, why the heck did you beat this guy? And then the scribe administers an oath to this complainant that he would not again speak to this woman on pain of mutilation and exile. Like, specific, he's like, don't talk to your wife, like literally your wife. Now, the crazy thing, that even with the oath that this man had to take on pain, mutilation, and exile, he goes to see his wife. And what happens? His wife gets pregnant. Unclear, though, if he's actually pregnant with his child, but, like, he goes to see his wife, and he gets her pregnant. Or somebody gets her pregnant. So then, the complainant's father, this is the funniest part of this whole thing. This man's father drags him before the magistrates, and then once again makes him swear to not go to the woman again, on the pain of penal labor. If you go to see her again, you will do forced labor. I just can't believe his father turned him in. It's so funny to me. And so what we see is that, like, there doesn't actually appear to have been any sort of punishment in the sense, like, they warned him and they made him say these oaths, but nothing ever came of them, especially when he broke the first one. But he doesn't have a wife anymore. That's, like, the biggest part, is, like, he does not have a wife anymore. So one of the reasons that he may have been punished because, like, that he made this accusation is that they actually were not living in the same house. They were living in separate houses, even though they were considered man and wife. The article that I mentioned, that I read this from, sort of briefly mentions that this was maybe because they were living in separate houses, they did not consummate the marriage. But we don't really have any evidence that consummation was even, like, part of what is considered a marriage in ancient Egypt. And that's because we don't really know a lot about ancient Egyptian marriages. The best word that we have for marriage is gereg pair, which means to enter into a partner's house. There's also ak ar pair, which means to live together, and hemsi irem. Oh, sorry. I said all those wrong. Gereg pair means to set up a house. Ak ar pair means to enter into the partner's house. And hemsi irem means to live together. These are the best words that we have that describe marriage. And so it's either in the sense that they are both creating a new home and they're both going to live in the same place, or that, like, the woman would go live with the husband and his family. Like, it's not totally even clear that way. But this might be why this guy got in trouble, is because they're not living together, so they are not considered man and wife. And that she is allowed to do whatever the fuck she wants, because she doesn't live with him. So she can go sleep with anyone she wants to. And that he is being punished essentially because he's making this accusation against her, which also might be why he's not really getting a real punishment, because he's just, like, he's accusing somebody of a crime when it didn't really happen, if that makes sense. It doesn't really appear that it was probably more legal, but it doesn't really appear that there was any sort of legality to it. It was sort of, you just kind of decided and did it. Like, there is some evidence of, like, more religious marriages, like, but that's more, like, for royalty and such. But, like, most of it just seemed like you want to get married, you live together, and that's it. Although divorces, we do have, like, divorce records, but it sort of makes sense is that, like, you need a record for a divorce to show where certain items are going. You don't really need a document to show that you're married, because all the items are just coming with you. Like, the legality of divorce was about separation of assets rather than you're no longer together, if that makes sense. Ooh, my throat hurts. $10:15 though, we're making good time. Not much left. Okay. The problem is I have to take this off, but it also is gonna make a mark on my forehead because it's way too tight. I need to get a better crown. Ugh. Okay. Ignore the line on my forehead. Okay. So we do also have some narratives that talk about adultery as the main topic. I think I do. Especially in, like, didactic literature. So in these texts, these are, like, again, these sort of warnings or advice, sort of. So, like, men are warned not to have intercourse with married women. One or both persons involved are, like, threatened with death, but, like, it doesn't necessarily mean that's an actual punishment for getting caught to do this. And so from all of these things, we can conclude that intercourse with a married woman was considered a crime, regardless if the man was married or not. But the main issue was that it was the offense of the personal right of the husband of the woman who is involved. And that essentially the personal right of a woman herself was kind of irrelevant. And therefore, we don't have the distinction, really, if, like, the intercourse took place voluntary or by force. It's not really distinguished. And so it appears that if there was a rape, It may have only been considered a crime if the raped woman was married, but we have such a lack of evidence to kind of prove if that's really what it is. But it really, a lot of the things we have about adultery only really sort of concern married women. There's not really much about kind of these sexual crimes unless you are married. But yeah, any questions? We're moving on to murder. We're getting progressively darker. God, it's hot in here. Okay. Oh. Also, this picture probably does not depict a murder. It probably depicts actually, like, beating somebody. Or possibly even punishing somebody, but I do not know the context. Okay. Last corn nut. Oh, yeah. And you can tell that he's, like, in trouble because he's, naked. He doesn't have any clothes like everyone else does. Okay. So obviously we've talked about the murder part of the assassination plots that we know about. But we obviously have other instances of murder that were not as intense as like the murder of a king. The word for to kill in ancient Egyptian is either sema or hedeb. And essentially nearly all evidence of killing and murder stems from the time of the end of the New Kingdom to the beginning of the Third Intermediate Period. Which makes sense because a lot of this is a time of social and political unrest. And despite having like a good amount of evidence of like attested cases of this, we don't really have an exact punishment for it, though we can assume that in some cases it will include the death penalty. So we have one piece called the myth of the sun's eye, and this is more of a narrative piece. It's not really a actual like written case, but it does state that someone who kills will be killed, and someone who orders to kill will be ruined. So it gives the assumption that death penalty is usually involved for anyone who does the physical killing, and that you will still get in a lot of trouble if you order the kill. In the Stela of Banishment, which dates from the Third Intermediate Period, it talks about that even planning to kill somebody will be sanctioned by the death penalty. In this text, and there's an oracle, and the oracle consults with a priest and says, quote, "As for everyone who will report before you," i.e. the god, "as to say, quote, 'Slay living people, will you destroy him, will you kill him?' Then the great god nodded in agreement very fervently." And so that the god will say that will destroy you. And then we do have some evidence on some mummies that show the possibility of them being murdered as their cause of death, though it's very hard to tell, obviously, because we can't do the full like autopsy and stuff. But there was a mummy head that has been found in Thebes, that shows a man was probably struck dead with some sort of instrument while he was lying down sleeping or unconscious. Weirdly, that the source that I got this from did not specify anything beyond that. I think they're probably referring to the mummy of Pharaoh Senkeneri-Tau. I don't know if that's what they're referring to, but we do know that the mummy of Senkeneri-Tau, which if you guys remember we talked about in our discussion like 2-3 weeks ago, Senkeneri-Tau was during the Second Intermediate Period, and he has these two big gashes on his forehead and a smaller gash like on behind his head. And he was most likely murdered in the sense that it was during war. And there are three really strong hypotheses as to how he was killed in battle. One is that he was either killed like physically in battle, like he is fighting on the trenches and was killed by some sort of Hyksos person. There's also the possibility there was an assassination plot via the Hyksos while he was laying down and sleeping. And then there's the other possibility that he was captured by the Hyksos and was executed in front of them. And could have been done while he was like lying down or something. I don't know if that's what this source I was looking for was specifically referenced, but the act of that he was lying down sleeping or unconscious is like a fact that keeps getting talked about with the mummy of Senkeneri Tau, so I'm like weirded out if it's not him. It means there was another one. And then there is another example of a possible murder of a woman. There's a skeleton that was found in Abydos, and she has like a very distinct stab wound in her back, probably like in her shoulder blade, that has this like blade that probably hit like her ribs and maybe even gone up to like her thorax. So we don't have anything like else specific about it, but there are some instances where you can see on the body, especially if it hit bone, and especially if you have the mummy and you can do a CT scan, sometimes you can get a little bit more insight that something occurred. Are we ever going to be able to say that it actually is murder? No. Like it's hard to tell, pretty much. Okay, the last thing we're just going to talk about, it's not as crazy as murder, but I realize I should include it at the very end, is just the possibility of injuring somebody, of just like beating somebody else up. It's one of the crimes that we have sort of the most evidence of, and it's like a lot of this dates to the Ramesside period as well. The word for injuring somebody else is kenken. And we do have a pretty diverse amount of like sentences, most often found coming from Deir el Medina. So we know that there were some corporal punishments such as like flogging or the assignment of forced labor. But the use of like forced labor wasn't totally sanctioned like throughout all of this. And it appears that like force used against a dependent person and children was not only like legitimate but like necessary to like maintain order. Again, like we've seen, every witness apparently has been beaten to make sure that they are telling the truth and stuff. And so weirdly, it does not appear that like any of the injured people receive any sort of compensation like for their injuries themselves. They just appear, they just know that the guy who did it gets in trouble. I do not know Casey Cleric. There was really no evidence. It just said from Abydos, so I don't have any specifics about that. But if you do know, if you remember what documentary that was, send it my way, and I'll see if maybe I can double check with the source. I'd have to look at what they cited for that specific reference, because I'm not sure. Okay, the last two things, just talk about like all of the punishments in general. So it appears that the most common death penalty situation is impalement. And you can see it's sort of based, we have no images of this, but we do have this hieroglyph, which is a little man getting impaled. And again, this is like done by placing the body on top of a pointed wooden stake and then putting it upright so that the act of like the weight of the person would like slowly pierce the body. So it's like really, really torturous. And this hieroglyph, interestingly, is as a determinative, is used in the phrase "to give on the wood," which literally is to be on like the wooden stake, which is like gross and horrible. Oh yeah, we would have loved that. The executions would probably take place in public, and we do even have one text saying that it took place besides a temple. Otherwise, most of the punishments seem to be beatings, mutilations. There are texts that speak of thrashings with a wooden stick for 10, 20, 50, 100, and even 2,000 times. There's also a mention of branding, like hot metal branding, mutilation of the nose and ears, like literally chopping them off. We don't, again, depictions are pretty rare. The beating seems to be the most common, but we do have these two interesting, we have sort of the beating and the crawling of here on the left. And then we also have this one on the right, which is the bounding of somebody to a pillory. And a pillory is essentially the ancient Egyptian version of the stocks. So like you see in like medieval Europe and at the Renaissance fair. So instead of like the single hole for the head and the holes for the hands, this is essentially a giant wooden stake that you just sit around and you're just tied up to, pretty much. And this comes from the temple of Meruka in the Old Kingdom in Saqqara, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so penal labor is kind of the equivalent of that, Snorri, but I'm not going to equate it to actual slavery, because I think there might be a possibility that you could be eventually freed from it. It's this forced labor. I don't think it would be the same thing as like slavery. But we don't have as much records on it, so it's a little bit hard to tell. Thank you, Casey Cleric. I'm gonna pause that and I'm gonna read it later. But thank you. I'm gonna look into that and see if that's the one that they're referencing. All right, we have an ad in 1 minute 30. I am actually gonna go take a quick bathroom break, but I'm gonna wait for the ad. We're really close to finishing. We only have 2 slides left. No, I'm gonna keep going. So we also have a depiction here on the left, which is a human with a yoke around its neck, similar to like an animal yoke, but he's being like dragged along by this guy, and you can see he's also naked. Again, naked is like demeaning and such, but also for like representing poor people. This is in the tomb of Henku in Deir el Medina, and this might be like a public punishment. And then we do also have on the right this picture from the Temple of Karnak that has a display of torture equipment at the bottom. I don't know how we know it's torture equipment, but I'm assuming with the text that's yoke. I know, it sounds like I'm saying yoke. They're the same in my mouth. But apparently these are all torture equipment. Yeah, the text probably says it's torture equipment, but this is from the temple at Karnak. Snorri, I will answer your question, but we're going to get an ad in just a quick sec, and I'm going to run to the bathroom, and then we will finish up. There's not much left, and then we can do bigger questions and such. I'll just say, Snorri, I have not found any evidence of any of this stuff being done to kids. So, I don't know. There's definitely probably some cases, but none of my evidence has anything to do with kids. Although it's hard to tell, honestly, the ages of anybody listed in the thing, but you can assume, like adult people. Alright, I'm gonna quickly go to the bathroom. I'm gonna do a battle royale. I'm waiting for the ad to pop up, but I will be right back and we will finish this up. Woo-hoo.
Computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
All right. Feel free on TikTok, ask me any questions about ancient Egypt, because there's an ad on Twitch, so we're taking a temporary pause. I will answer that question, Bev, in just a second. Oh my god. Ashley, I do! I don't have a book recommendation, but I'm hoping you can get these via TikTok. Oh, content too long. There are some articles on JSTOR that I'm gonna put in the chat. JSTOR, if you are a student, you can log in with your university to get access, but otherwise, if you can make a free JSTOR account, and you can read 100 articles a year with that account. So these are 4. They're also, oh, that one's too long. I apologize. When you go on the side, like if you make a JSTOR account and you log in so you can see it, it will also give you suggested readings that are similar to what you are reading, and that's where I found all of these. So one of those is like the main source that I used for this lecture, and then a couple of them I read a couple things and added into, but some of them are a little bit long. Okay, I am scrolling back. Congrats, Shasta and Casey for winning the Battle Royales. Okay, the last thing that we will talk about is that some of these punishments have left evidence on ancient Egyptian skeletons. There's actually a study was done on a large population of essentially the more common people, the middle class and lower, in Elephantine, in the Old Kingdom specifically, so much, much older, and as well as the First Intermediate period. And a lot of them were found with bone fractions, which can usually be interpreted as the result of harsh beatings. And so from what we know, a lot of the text mentioned that criminals were sent to Elephantine. And it makes sense because that area is really big in quarrying, and quarrying is really hard work, and that might have been a really that would have been that forced labor and such. Snorri, you should go to bed. You should go to bed. I always do. Y'all are up too late. Can I ask the Twitch nerds if they think Ramses the 12th is real? We all know Ramses the 12th isn't real. I didn't realize this is a thing that somebody else asked me that before, and it's a thing that Ramses the 12th is real. Well, there's a relatively okay theory that he's sort of real, but anyone on Twitch, does anyone want to weigh in if Ramses the 12th is real? I don't know enough about this, but somebody has asked me about this before, and I just remember looking up and stuff. Yeah, what, that's what it is. He has one inscription. There's 4 Shawshanks the seconds. Yeah. It's hard. It's yeah, as real as Scorpion 1. So I remember now, you're reminding me about this. There's apparently one inscription of another Ramesses. Remember, these Ramesses don't have numbers associated with them. They have different throne names, they have different personal names, they have different Horus names and all that. So there's one inscription of a Ramses that does not match any of the other Ramses and dates to presumably after Ramses the 11th, which would then make him Ramses the 12th, but there's literally one inscription of him. So it's similar to Semenkhare and Neferuaten, where we see them we see their names in the cartouche, which would tell us that they are a pharaoh, but like, did they actually sort of rule, or did they not, or did they try? And like, so Star mentions that like that one person's name is similar to the ones of Ramses II. Ramses II was a jackass. He did a lot of different things, so who knows? Maybe at one point he had it was a different name and stuff. So it's harder to determine, but I'm in the boat that there's still 11. There is this kind of skeletal evidence that a lot of people in the Old Kingdom and First Intermediate period that were buried in Elephantine had these beatings, like possibly, which could be an indication of these people that are working in the quarries and these criminals essentially being sent to Elephantine to work in the quarries. It's not the most perfect science, but it does show like certain types of physical labor do have skeletal markers that do kind of help you understand how that person was working consistently over a long period of time. So the punishment of forced labor seems to have been relatively widespread, as it was more useful to the culprits than actually to imprison them. And we mentioned banishment to Nubia, to Elephantine, sometimes even mentioned the gold mines in the Eastern Desert. And the very interesting thing is, it does not even seem that there was the concept of a prison and like to imprison somebody forever, unless a culprit is waiting trial. But there does not really seem to be like these huge widespread prison systems. You essentially would probably most likely just get sent to do forced labor and stuff. Oh, Vev, I forgot to ask your question. Why are people so often naked in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs? They actually are not. People being naked is pretty rare. And the weird thing is, there are two kind of main reasons you would see a naked person in depictions. One, children are almost always depicted naked. Like, almost always. And two, if you've noticed, all the instances where we've seen naked people in this sense are the people being punished. And it would be literally in this sense that, like, it could be reflecting somebody who is poor, but it also could be reflecting someone who is a criminal. But naked people are actually not as common in ancient Egyptian art in, like, the grand scheme of things. We don't have as many as dance. There are some dancers. Yeah, that's another good option. Yeah, so I would say men is the reason. I say women, there are other reasons for women being depicted naked. It's not as many. Dancers is one of them, and then also women in mourning, because they rip their clothing off. So they're actually ripping like their tops off to kind of show how anguished they are. So like those are two instances of like women being depicted like naked or half naked, and men tend to be like children or beatings. And there are female children, obviously, that are sometimes depicted, but yeah, I forgot to answer that question. That was a good one. I lost my place because I accidentally scrolled too high. So I'll finish off with this phrase from the instructions of Mary Carré, which mentions a lot of different punishments and all the things that like you can do. And so this says, quote, "Do justice, then you endure on earth. The weeper, don't oppress the widow. Don't expel a man from his father's property. Don't reduce the nobles in their possessions. Beware of punishing wrongfully. Do not kill, it does not serve you. Punish with beatings, with detention. Thus will the land be well ordered. Except for the rebel whose plans are found out, for God knows the treason plotters. God smites the rebels in blood." Very general, but it definitely says like beat it, like don't kill somebody, like it's not going to serve you, like detain them, punish them with beatings, and except for the people who are really doing bad, who are like rebelling against like the state or the king, like God's gonna find them and the gods are going to smite them and stuff. So that is the end. Does anyone have any questions? what would be, like, in ancient Egypt? Or are you asking for, like, a weird opinion? What would be the worst punishment? I mean, death is pretty bad. For an ancient Egyptian, it would probably be death and not being able to access the afterlife. So that would be death and then probably the burning of your body. That is probably the worst. Because it means that you can't even live out the second life that you were supposed to have, essentially. Granted, did a lot of, like, middle class and lower class people have that concept? Like, did they really get that concept that they were going to get a secondary life? Maybe not, but yeah. Ooh! Any influence between Hammurabi's Code and the laws of Egypt? Very possible. Ugh. I know. So I've been in the presence of Hammurabi's Code, and I don't know what Hammurabi's Code is. Like, I know it's the law and stuff, but I would say there is a definite possibility because Mesopotamia and Egypt were quite intertwined and such. So I'd have to look at specifically what Hammurabi's Code says. To actually see, like, direct stuff, but it's not the craziest thing because they had access to each other and talked to each other a lot. The removal of names is also important, but the name is only one portion of the ancient Egyptian soul, and the body and the creation of the Ka are arguably more important than the name. Thank you, Kepper. Thank you, Lady Lara Croft. God damn it, these corn nuts. They're so dry. There are 8 pieces of the ancient Egyptian soul. There is... Let me look it up. I always forget. You can get most of them, and then I forget one of them. Okay, there is the Ket, the physical body. So that you need your physical body to be preserved so that you can go to the afterlife, which is why they do mummification in the first place. The Sa is the spiritual body. The Ren is the name or the identity. The Ba is the personality. It's also a flying aspect of the soul, so it can go in between the real life and the afterlife. The Ka is the double or the vital essence. The Ib is the heart. The Shuyet is the shadow, and the Sekhem is the power or the form. So that is 8. Yeah, 8 pieces. So, like, yes, the name and the identity, that is one part, but, like, it's not the biggest thing.